Welcome to Dead Souls Social Club.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
If you enjoy our show and you find our research interesting, please leave us a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform. Something that small really does go a long way in helping us out. You can find more about us and the research that we do by heading over to Instagram and searching our name. As always, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Tonight's episode is a step in a different direction for us as a podcast. We don't normally publish episodes about missing people. That's not something that we usually look into. But with that said, there are two particular cases of people who have seemingly vanished into thin air that have stayed with me over the years. And when I mentioned to my team recently that I tried to stay up to date regarding these two cases of missing people, it turned out that Grace, my associate researcher, also had an avid interest in these two specific cases. So with that in mind, how could we not put our head together on this one? When I first became aware of these mysteries through the media, I was immediately suspicious as to the bigger story. Those feelings of suspicion and unease only grew over the years as I learned more information and with more research that I conducted into them. Both of these instances of teenagers going missing attached themselves to me because when I first learned of them, I was a teenager myself. I felt a connection to the vanished, an understanding of them as they were both around my age at the time of disappearing, and more so, I had so much sympathy and sadness for the families that it affected. Over the years, I have been in awe of the strength and resilience of the families involved, and how after many years have passed since the loss of their child, they have never given up the search and never rested, even in the face of so much difficulty and challenge. I can never not admire that. So with that said, and given the information that both Grace and I have amassed over the years, we thought both cases would make interesting episodes for you guys. We also thought that these stories need to remain in the public psyche and awareness of them should be kept fresh. And this is our way of doing what we can to contribute to that in our own small little manner. Tonight is part 1 of a 2-part series, with the second part dropping in a few weeks, following a deep dive series that we have been working on. So be sure to keep an eye out for each of those. This is Missing, Part 1, The Disappearance of Lee Boxell. Warning: the contents of this podcast episode discusses the murder and assault of children. Further, it discusses child sexual abuse and may be distressing for some listeners. Caution is strongly advised. Tonight we are going back to Saturday the 10th of September 1988 and to the London suburb of Sutton, specifically a small village called Cheam. Things were slightly different back then. There were no mobile phones, no internet, and only 4 channels on the television. The Winter Olympics took place in Calgary and the Summer Olympics were held in Seoul. Michael Dukakis and George Bush competed for the 1988 US presidential election. The Soviet Union withdrew its troops from Afghanistan, and in the United Kingdom, Margaret Thatcher became the world's longest-serving Prime Minister of the 20th century. In December, the devastating Pan Am Flight 103 disaster shocked the world. Some of the biggest movies of the year were Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Rain Man, Die Hard and Big. And the top charting albums in the UK belonged to Cliff Richard, Kylie Minogue and Michael Jackson. Things were very different to how we see society and culture today, but in some aspects, they were almost identical. Teenagers socialized by calling each other on landline telephones from their parents' hallways and living rooms. They arranged to meet in advance to hang out at the mall, fast food restaurants and public parks. They went to movies, roller skating and bowling. They enjoyed listening to music on cassette and vinyl records. Board games were popular, as were role-playing fantasy games like Dungeons and Dragons. It was commonplace for teenagers to have regular hobbies and specific interests, having to put more effort into finding entertainment than teenagers do today. They went to what they called discos, and ultimately, and particularly in the UK, teenagers of high school age would commonly try to get their hands on alcohol, even though the legal age to drink, as it was and remains to this day, is 18. Finally, as it was the 80s, smoking cigarettes was common amongst all age groups, but teenagers particularly would pick up the habit around high school age. The legal age to purchase cigarettes in the UK at the time was 16, and teens 2 or even 3 years younger could fairly easily acquire them, given a more lax approach from shopkeepers during this decade in allowing the sale to those under the legal age. The day that started like any other Saturday would change the lives of Peter and Christine Boxell forever. Peter and Christine lived with their 2 children, their son Lee, aged 15, and their daughter Lindsay, who was 12 at the time. They lived in a modest mid-terrace house in quiet and leafy Cheam, a small village in the borough of Sutton in London. Cheam is a very, very old town, with its founding dating back more than 1,400 years, and even before that there is evidence of a Roman settlement on that location some 600 years prior. The name Cheam has evolved from the Old English word Cegum, which means village by the tree stumps. In the Domesday Book of 1086, Cheam was documented as having assets of 4 hides, 1 church, 17 ploughs, 1 mile or 1.6 kilometre of meadow, and woodland worth 25 hogs. It was valued at £14. Back when it was founded, less than 20 people inhabited the village. Compare that to 1988, the year we're discussing tonight, and Cheam had about 10,000 residents. I guess if you were to describe Cheam, it would be considered a very classic, traditional English village with many historic listed buildings, with Gothic Revival architecture, several large Victorian-era parks, and tree-lined streets. A middle-class, affluent area, popular with families and those who enjoy being close to London while still appreciating peace and quiet. The village has a very low crime rate and is considered extremely safe and friendly. Lee Boxell was a very lovable boy, his family say. He was quite shy and timid and didn't have a lot of self-confidence, though he was extremely polite, happy and friendly. Lee loved to go to football games, being a fan of Sutton United and Wimbledon FC, though he would frequent games by other teams too. He would never attend matches on his own, however, choosing to always go with a friend, or on the rare occasion, his dad. Lee was a little bit worried that he might get lost on the way or somebody might bully him if he went to the football alone, though given the culture of football in the 1980s, this doesn't seem too much of an overreaction to me. Regardless, his father Peter would say that Lee wasn't very streetwise. I guess you could say that Lee was innocent for his age. As well as the football, Lee was a huge fan of pop music of the day, bands like Dire Straits and T'Pau. He collected quite a few vinyl records and his family considered him to have really good taste in music. Lee was very quiet and didn't go out a whole lot other than to football matches, though he did have a small group of close and trusted friends that he socialised with, and though being quiet, he was not a loner, and he was well liked by school friends and kids in the neighbourhood. Lee was very close with his family and often went out with his parents and sister, who enjoyed family activities and trips together. Lee had never been in trouble. He wasn't that sort of boy. He was an average student in school, but attended every day without fail. I guess you could call Lee an all-around good kid. On Saturday, the 10th of September 1988, a beautiful and warm sunny summer's day, Lee went missing and was never seen again. His dad Peter gave this record of the morning of September the 10th. Peter and his wife got up early along with Lindsay, Lee's sister. Lee was the last to get up and often liked to sleep in on a Saturday. He was a teenage boy after all. The family all had plans to do differing things that day. Lee came downstairs in his pyjamas and sat down in an armchair. Pete recalled that Lee still looked half asleep and hadn't fully woken up just yet. Lindsay was going to a friend's house that day, whilst his father was planning on doing some shopping. Peter told Lee that his mother was going to his grandmother's house for the day to look after her, as she was ill at the time. "What are you going to do?" Peter asked Lee. Lee gave a short, mumbled answer, but Peter wasn't a pushy dad at all, so he figured he's just woken up and he hasn't quite come around yet, so he didn't press him any further. "Okay, well, I'll see you later when I come back from the shops," Peter said. And with that, Peter, Christine and Lindsay all left, heading out to their respective activities. Peter arrived home an hour or so later, and by that point Lee had gone out. He had left the house at around 10:30 a.m. and gone to Sutton Town Centre, where he was meeting up with his friend Russell at 11 a.m. to hang out and do some shopping. Lee was wearing black jeans, brown suede shoes, a white Flintstones t-shirt and a Swatch watch which he had received as a birthday gift from his mum and dad. Lee had planned to go to a football game in the afternoon. Russell decided to head home around 1 p.m. instead of going to the football game with Lee. Though Lee did tell him as they parted ways outside the Carousel, a local games arcade, that he was still thinking of going to Selhurst Park Football Stadium anyway, to watch Charlton Athletic versus Millwall. They parted ways on Sutton High Street. Lee was then seen by two friends at 2:20 p.m. outside the Tesco supermarket, which is now an Asda supermarket, or Walmart to my American friends. This was also on Sutton High Street, and for those of you Googling these locations, the Asda address is officially on St. Nicholas Way, but such is the size of the building, it also has a store entrance and exit on High Street too. The two friends who spotted Lee knew him well from school and from Sutton Football Club, where Lee and one of the two boys sold football programs on match day together for the club. Lee didn't mention to the two boys that he was going to the football match that afternoon at Selhurst Park, and given the time, it's unlikely that Lee was going there now. The Tesco was a 15-minute walk to Sutton train station. Lee would have to have walked there and got on a train to Selhurst Park. By the time he did that, plus the train journey, then the walk to the football stadium, Lee would have missed kick-off. Lee didn't mention to his two friends what he was doing that day though, and they parted ways shortly after. The two friends told police that Lee headed east when he left, towards his home and not south towards the train station. That was the last confirmed sighting of Lee. He never returned home. By around 5 p.m. that evening, his parents were starting to get worried. Lee always called his mother to tell her where he was and when he would be home, or if he was going to be late. He knew she worried about him, so he was sure to always keep her updated so she didn't stress too much. I'll add a side note here to say that police officers involved in this case have stated that they felt Lee's mother was pretty overbearing and potentially fussed too much over Lee, considering he was a 15-year-old boy after all. In fact, one police officer has stated that initially some officers thought he had run away because his mother was so possessive. She had told officers that when Lee started high school, she went out of her way to get a job at the same school so she could watch over him, and also spoke of following him to school on his first day without him knowing. Though Christine did tell him she did this afterwards, and Lee pleaded with her not to do that again and to not be so clingy. By the Saturday night, Peter was concerned, and when Christine called from her mother's house and found out Lee still hadn't come home, she was panicked enough to get a taxi straight home. Peter and Christine called around friends, family and anyone who might know Lee. They called hospitals to see if Lee had had an accident. Christine immediately thought something terrible had happened. Quote, "I just know Lee would have rung me to say that he was going out or he was running late, but he didn't. It was so out of character for him," unquote, Christine said. The Boxells called the police and reported Lee missing later that night. The police didn't come to meet with the Boxells until Sunday morning, however, resulting in a night of despair and pure hell for Christine and Peter. The police said they were confident that they would find Lee and assured Peter and Christine that all would work out fine. They seemed more interested in letting them know that they would be able to give Lee a good telling off when he was found, strangely. Following which, a police officer drove Peter around Sutton and the surrounding area to see if they could find Lee, but there was no sign of him. 2 days after Lee's disappearance, there was an appeal in the news. The Wimbledon Football Club footballer John Fashanu made an appeal for anyone with information to come forward. Fashanu was a hero of Lee's. He would have loved that. Meanwhile, the police felt their best place to start looking for Lee, aside from around his local town, was in the CCTV footage of the football stadiums in the area, starting with Selhurst Park, where he told a friend that he might go. The CCTV at the football stadiums didn't turn up any viable leads, however. Further, in 1988, CCTV was almost non-existent outside of the football grounds or airports, so there was no option of any footage from the shopping centre where Lee had been that morning with his friend. The Boxells went door to door in the town asking for information from anyone who might have seen Lee. They handed out flyers and put up missing persons posters. They sought all the publicity they possibly could, and to try and keep the story in the public eye for as long as possible. Days turned to weeks, and weeks to months, months to years, with no new information. The investigation. As Cheam is a village within the borough of Sutton in London, that means the investigation into the disappearance of Lee was handled by the Metropolitan Police. Within the Met, the case was specifically handled by ARMIT, the Area Major Incident Team. Sadly, the case went cold pretty quickly. There was simply not much to go on. No one had seen Lee. There were no persons of interest or suspects in the case, and there were no significant leads. Given his age, the police initially looked at convicted child sex offenders, though this again turned up nothing of relevance. 4 months after the disappearance was first reported, in January 1989, the case was downgraded from a major incident investigation to the CID, or Criminal Investigation Department, in the local village police station. This effectively put the case on hold, unless of course someone came forward with information or evidence to reactivate work on the case. Up until this point, the most significant lead in the case was when a man came to the Boxell's house out of the blue. He asked to speak with Peter and told him that Lee was working on a market in West London. Although it seemed a stretch, Peter was desperate and went to the market. He saw the boy and walked right up to him and spoke to him. He was almost an identical image of Lee, to the point where Peter almost believed it was actually him, until he spoke and Peter realized that it wasn't his son. The boy in the market had a completely different accent and voice. Peter felt ridiculous, slightly crazy, but he needed to find his son. It would be 1990, nearly 2 years after Lee's disappearance, before the police would gain a significant breakthrough, and even then, it would only be by chance. In April 1990, a person would be arrested for the suspicion of murdering Lee Boxell. Wait, Peter thought, a murder? Lee was only missing. What had changed? The man the police had arrested had been overheard saying that he'd, quote, done over a boy and buried him within a crypt in the grounds of St. Dunstan's Church in Sutton, unquote. Even though it seemed like gossip and wasn't much to go on, it had been the only thing the police had heard in 2 years, and they were keen to move forward with the case if they could. The case had featured a lot in the media, and the locals were concerned and asking what was going on. The police needed some kind of result. The man's comments had been reported to the police by someone who said they truly believed that the man was telling the truth. The police made inquiries with the church, speaking with the parish vicar to see if there was any disturbed tombs at St. Dunstan's. The church told the police no tombs had ever been disturbed at all, though they expressed sadness at the disappearance of Lee and wished that they could help with the inquiry more. It's not known what specific inquiries or investigations the church made to be able to provide confirmation or claim that no tombs had ever been disturbed within the church grounds. Given that there are over 4,000 known burial sites in the church grounds, to check them all would be a significant piece of work, surely. Also, let's not forget that a number of graves and tombs within the church grounds will also be unmarked given the age of the building and its grounds. For clarity, the current church building was built in 1864, though it replaced a previous church building that dated back roughly 900 years. I'll explain later why this is a point of significance. The man who made the comment and who was arrested was interviewed by police. For legal reasons, I'm unable to provide the name of the man who was arrested. It's not in the public domain, and as he was never charged, I must respect his privacy. But during the police interview, he admitted to making the comments but claimed they were empty boasts and a bit of fun. This, it would seem, would be a sufficient answer for the police, who did little more at this point to investigate the claims deeper. If the man's claims were true, then it would have turned the case of a missing boy into a murder case and triggered significantly more resources and time. But police were quick to assess the man's explanation as truthful. The police failed to ask if the man arrested had any connection to St. Dunstan's Church, and if so, what those links were. If the claims were made up, why did he choose St. Dunstan's Church as part of his story? The police didn't ask any of this. With all that, and the police taking the church's word at face value that no tombs had been disturbed, this meant that no search was carried out in the church grounds. The arrested man was thus released with no formal charges taken. After this, the case went dormant once again. The 1990s. Information from the police files that has since been released or leaked has revealed that during the 1990s there was a regular flow of rumour and local information that suggested that a local paedophile was involved in Lee's disappearance. The police became very aware of what the rumours were saying about this paedophile, and more so, what the locals were saying happened to Lee. However, the paedophile named in all of the rumours was not made a suspect or a person of interest or even interviewed by the investigating officers. They chose only to keep the information on file at the time. As the disappearance occurred in 1988, this period and most of the 1990s meant that the police kept all case information on paper files. This meant that swathes of information were not analysed due to the difficulty in doing this from paper compared to digital data. If the information collected over the years had been analysed at that point, there would have been a clear picture of a man named in many local rumours and anonymous tip-offs to police as being someone that they should look at. All the info suggested the same person was involved in Lee's disappearance, specifically a convicted paedophile who lived in the area. To further add to this, information was given anonymously to the National Missing Persons Helpline. This was a charity established specifically to support with the search for missing people in the United Kingdom. The information that they received was, once again, the same named paedophile, but this time he had been heard telling people stories about Lee and how he was still alive and living in London with a girlfriend. At this time, an anonymous young lady acquaintance of the paedophile made this anonymous tip-off to the Missing Persons Helpline. This paedophile was quoted by the young lady acquaintance in 1989 as saying, quote, "If you don't do as I say, then you will end up like that black bloke I buried on top of Lee Boxell." Unquote. In 1998, the UK crime tip-off line Crime Stoppers received a call from a member of the public. It had been 10 years since Lee had gone missing. The caller, who again wished to remain anonymous, named 2 males as being involved in the disappearance of Lee. One of those 2 names was the same person who was arrested by police in 1990. So now the police had 2 different names that multiple witnesses and tipsters were giving as the 2 men responsible for Lee's disappearance. But still, however, very little was done to take steps to actively investigate the men further, and it's not clear why. Yet. In the 1990s, even more rumours started to emerge about the convicted paedophile. As well as being involved in Lee's disappearance, he was also now being accused of the sexual abuse of young girls. The convicted paedophile at the centre of these rumours and allegations is named as William Lambert. Lambert was the groundskeeper and gravedigger at St. Dunstan's Church in Sutton. In March 1999, a breakthrough in the case came. 2 separate witnesses contacted The Missing, a UK charity that also supports in the search of missing people. These 2 witnesses named 2 men as being involved in Lee's disappearance. Both witnesses also stated that the men they named were involved in the sexual abuse of young girls and boys at an unofficial youth club that local teenagers in Sutton called, quote, The Shed. The Shed, it transpired, was a small recreation building on the grounds of St Dunstan's Church. Whilst the police didn't follow this up initially, a caseworker for the National Missing Persons Helpline by the name of Mike Platt did. He had been a police detective for the Metropolitan Police until his retirement in 1997, and his area of expertise was in the exploitation and abuse of children. Platt was able to access the police case files after reaching out to an old contact within the police force, and the subject of the shed at St Dunstan's Church in particular stood out on the file as being an area of an investigation that hasn't been, but should be, investigated. Platt visited the church to get an idea and feel for the location. As he arrived, he right away bumped into William Lambert, who was conducting some grass cutting and routine maintenance in the church grounds at the time. After Platt had explained who he worked for and that he was conducting research into the disappearance of Lee Boxell, William Lambert told Platt that he actually knew Lee and invited Platt into his maintenance shed for a chat. During the conversation, Lambert told Platt that he had actually seen Lee after he went missing, around 2 weeks after he went missing to be exact. At this point, Platt realised the value of the information that Lambert was sharing, so stated that he had to leave but would come back the next day. As good as his word, Platt returned the next day with a colleague of his, a fellow caseworker for the missing charity by the name of Dave Flannery. Upon their arrival, Lambert was with another man at his churchyard maintenance hut, a man by the name of Robert Smith. Once again, Lambert stated that he knew Lee well from when he attended the Shed youth group. He continued again that he had seen Lee after his disappearance. Smith, it transpired, also claimed to know Lee, and he added that he was also present with Lambert when this sighting occurred, and he corroborated the story. In further revelations, and in a fairly off-the-cuff manner, Smith and Lambert said that they saw him after he vanished in 1988. Lambert specifically said that he saw Lee in 1989, and Smith specifically added that he spoke to Lee in 1993, 5 years after his disappearance. He spoke to him near to Sutton train station, and Lee, Smith said, was now calling himself Leslie. In fact, Lambert stated, he was aware that Lee was working for the Governmental Department of Social Services in Sutton and was in a relationship with a pretty young lady who he believed to be his wife. When Platt asked Lambert why he hadn't notified the police, given that Lee was a missing person and how his disappearance was in all the press and media at the time, Lambert stated that, quote, "Well, no police came and asked me or questioned me, so I assumed they weren't that bothered," unquote. A strange response. I mean, how are the police meant to know of a random person who knows the location of Lee and then just turn up at their house to ask where he is? Anyway, I digress. Platt shared this information with the police immediately. He was confident that this would be a breakthrough in the case. 2 people who claim to know Lee are both saying they saw him after his disappearance, that he was alive and well, that he had changed his identity, and that they knew this new identity and where he worked. It's pretty significant, right? Surely this will lead to arrests being made and searches undertaken. But sadly, no. Once again, nothing happened with this information at all. The case instead remained stagnant. This information was also not shared with the Boxell family, who remained in the dark regarding the anonymous tips and information that were being submitted throughout the 1990s. Just to add my own thoughts here, if you were planning on vanishing and changing your identity to get away from your family for whatever reasons, would you keep your same image and also remain in the same town? This is what Smith and Lambert were essentially alleging that Lee did. Both men are saying that at 15, Lee vanished, looked the same several years later, as they recognised him on the street immediately, that somehow Lee got a house and a wife in the same town and started work at a government agency in the same town, yet no one else, be it friends, family or the general public, had seen him at all since the day he disappeared. Bear in mind, Lee's face at the time was on milk cartons, posters, the television news, newspapers, billboards, public notices at train stations, airports and bus stations, and for several years after he vanished, Lee's image and story was very much in the public domain. Does that sound likely to you? Do you think he would vanish, yet be secretly living a successful life less than a mile away from his family? Please share your thoughts with us, we would love to hear them.
You've seen Lee, saw him around, or know of his whereabouts, if they can contact the police. Obviously everything will be dealt with in the strictest confidence. I mean, that goes without saying. So if there's somebody out there who knows where Lee is, please give a call.
That was John Fashanu, the Wimbledon football player, on the national news. The 1990s drew to a close, and after more than a decade missing, police seem no closer to solving the riddle of what happened to Lee Boxell. St. Dunstan's Church. So let's talk about this church. As I stated earlier, the current St. Dunstan's Church was built in 1864, though the site had been a place of worship for some 900 years before that. In 2011, the church made national headlines for being the site of an unofficial youth club named The Shed. In the late 1980s, The Shed was operated in a church outbuilding to the rear of the church by the church's groundkeeper, a former soldier named William Lambert. Yes, that William Lambert. It was at The Shed that Lambert abused children as young as 13. The Shed was popular with local teenagers as it was a place they could go to hang out and openly smoke and drink alcohol without being stopped by adults or police. The Shed had a social area with tables, chairs and a couch, about 5 meters by 15 meters in size. It had a small kitchen area, a lavatory and a small room at the back which contained an old mattress. There was also a stereo for listening to music and a television to watch too. The walls were sporadically decorated with satanic and occult symbols and images. This was due to Lambert dabbling in occult rituals and claiming to those who attended The Shed that he was a warlock with magical powers. I'll pop some photographs of The Shed over on our Instagram page so you'll get some idea of what it looked like inside. By all intents and purposes, it was a bit of a shithole, but great if you were a teenager looking for a bit of privacy, with friends, or a hangout spot where you could do literally anything. As I said, The Shed was an unofficial youth club. By that I mean it was not affiliated or endorsed by the church, and the rector of St. Dunstan claims that he had no knowledge of its existence. It was operated by Lambert in relative secrecy. But, even at the time that The Shed operated, there were rumours about Lambert floating around amongst the teenagers who frequented the club. Rumours of Lambert's temper and also his behaviour towards underage teenagers. Multiple victims have since come forward and accused Lambert of sexual assault, rape and grooming. In fact, 3 women who were young girls who attended The Shed in 1987 and 1988 came forward and accused Lambert of sexual assault in 1993, though a jury would find him innocent based on the glowing character reference from the rector of St. Dunstan's Church at the time. Another regular at The Shed made a report to the National Missing Persons Helpline in 1999 to state that William Lambert once told him that he helped Lee Boxell obtain a new ID, including a passport and an address. Lambert also told the witness that he had killed people and burned them within the cemetery grounds. Further, even more witnesses have stated that Lambert used to boast about being a powerful warlock and how he had learned magical powers. He was known to entice teenagers into having sex with him by claiming that they would obtain magical powers from him if they did. One specific 14-year-old, who had become pregnant, confided in Lambert. Lambert said that he could abort the baby and her worries and problems would go away. Lambert then told her that to abort the baby, she would have to have sex with him and his penis would trigger the abortion. Utterly horrific. So who was William Lambert? Well, his full name is Patrick James Lambert. He changed his name to William David Lambert in the 1970s. This was due, according to his daughter, to being bullied as a child due to being overweight. Kids in school would call him Billy Bunter after a character from a 1940s British comic strip that was published in Magnet magazine. Bill eventually stuck, and he took on the moniker permanently. He was born on September 28, 1935 in Surrey, and started work as a porter for British Railways at Worcester Park Station at age just 15. That job only lasted about 2 years though, as he was sacked in 1952 after being convicted for receiving stolen cigarettes. In August 1964, Lambert joined the army, serving in the Parachute Regiment, although that's his recollection. His family members have since disputed this and stated that his time in the army was a complete fabrication by him. In 1968, he was sentenced to jail for exposing himself to 2 young girls under 14 years of age and for impersonating a police officer. Lambert has never been a police officer. He married in 1957 and had 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. The marriage didn't last that long and ended in divorce a few years later. Lambert married again in the late 1970s and had another 4 children, so that's 8 in total. These 4 were all boys. Lambert was suspected by local police during the late 60s and early 70s of committing several other crimes in the area, but there was insufficient evidence to charge him. Local police in Sutton were also made aware of Lambert in 1985, after he was reported to be running an occult coven, leading the group as head witch. Whilst this wasn't illegal, it was during the height of the Satanic Panic, so no doubt authorities kept a close tab on these activities. In 1993, as we previously mentioned, Lambert faced trial for multiple sexual offences. An entry from his police report was read out during his trial, which stated, quote, "William Lambert is purported to be a youth worker, and while using the premises, known as the Shed at St Dunstan's Church, claims have been made that he introduced young girls to the occult." Unquote. In order to enter the occult, girls were forced to perform various sex acts, were forced to have sexual intercourse, and were forced into sexual activities with men reported to be friends of Lambert. His charges included 6 allegations of rape and indecent assaults. Lambert was acquitted of all charges, due to the St Dunstan's Reverend Timothy Surtees providing a glowing character reference in court for him. Then in 2010, William Lambert appeared at Croydon Crown Court, once again charged with rape, indecent assault and sexual grooming. 4 women who had attended the Shed in the late 1980s give strikingly similar accounts of abuse, despite not knowing each other since their early teens. The jury found Lambert guilty on 1 count of rape, 2 counts of indecent assault, and 2 counts of procuring girls to have sexual intercourse by deception. William Lambert was jailed after being sentenced to 11 years. Case review. In 2003, the police undertook a routine review of Lee's case. Whilst the review did not identify any new suspects, it did collate all the tip-offs and witness statements that had come in over the years since Lee's disappearance. The review identified William Lambert as a significant witness, not a suspect, but a witness, which is fairly astonishing given the multitude of rumours and accusations against him. Robert Smith was also made a significant witness during this review too, due to his alleged sightings of Lee after his disappearance. By the way, I will add here that Robert Smith is actually William Lambert's nephew. That may or not be interesting information to you. Eventually, Lambert, Smith, and a third unidentified man were questioned by police. All that is known about the third man is that he made claims in a pub one evening that he knew that Lee Boxell had been murdered and that he had been buried in the grounds of St Dunstan's Church. Lambert, when interviewed, stated that he did not really know Lee Boxell and that he'd only ever met him on one occasion. Lee had come to the shed with other friends of his, Lambert stated. He also said that he had heard that Lee had some difficulties at home with his mother, and he had changed his name to Leslie Hall. Lambert also said that he had seen Lee in Sutton High Street about a year after he had gone missing. He was with Rob Smith at the time of the sighting, who said could corroborate this happening. Smith, during his interview with police, said that Lee was a regular visitor to the church grounds in 1988. After Lee disappeared, he changed his name to Leslie, and Smith added that roughly 3 years after Lee's disappearance, he turned up at the church and spoke to Smith, saying, quote, "Don't tell her indoors that you've just seen me," referring to a wife or girlfriend. "I'm just back to look at old haunts." Smith added that he believed that Lee, now Les, worked for the Department of Social Security in Sutton. Both interesting stories. But Lee was not working for the Department of Social Security, not as either Lee Boxell or Leslie Hall. In fact, no record of a Leslie Hall could be found from birth or marriage records. The Department of Social Security had no records of a Lee Boxell or Leslie Hall ever working for them, and this search was extended to other governmental departments who all turned up no records too. To add to that, the Department of Social Security is a government body where extensive background checks are carried out in order to be employed there. Rob Smith strongly denies any involvement in Lee's disappearance and has never been charged in relation to this matter, nor has William Lambert for clarity. Along with Smith and Lambert, Trudy Crowley was also interviewed by police. Trudy is the girlfriend of Rob Smith. Just like Smith, she strongly denies any involvement in the disappearance of Lee Boxell, and she has also never been charged with the crime. Trudy told police that all she knew, which was received second-hand, she says, from Smith and Lambert, was that Lee Boxell is still alive, but changed his name to Leslie Hall and now worked for the DVLA, or the Driving and Vehicle Licensing Agency in Wimbledon. Again, for clarity, the DVLA have no record of a Lee Boxell or Leslie Hall having ever worked for them. Following the interviews, police decided to search the ground of St Dunstan's Church. First with ground-penetrating radar, then afterwards they actually decided to excavate the grounds themselves. First in 2012, between June and September, then again in April of the subsequent year. There was one caveat, however. The police were only given permission by the church to excavate the ground in between the graves. They could not enter any tombs or crypts, and they were not to disturb any graves whatsoever. The dig was the largest in Scotland Yard's history, but sadly, it turned up no evidence. In 2022, Steve Lambert, the son of William Lambert, made some statements and accusations in the press. Steve was one of 4 brothers from William Lambert's second marriage. He spoke of an extremely abusive upbringing at the hands of his father, and how William would beat all of his sons with regularity. Steve said his childhood was devoid of love and that his father William was a monster. Steve said that he was aware of the rumours about his father abusing underage girls at the shed. His mum was too, but she would never talk about it. As a teenager, Steve would be taken along by his father on burglaries in the area, and also his father would use him to steal materials from a timber merchant so that he could build and repair the shed. Steve commented how when his father started working at St Dunstan's, he slowly began spending more and more time there, heading down in the morning and regularly not coming home until well after midnight. He also accused his father of stealing his mother's jewels so that he could use the money for the shed. Additionally, Steve stated that his father had many hidden locations throughout the graveyard at St Dunstan's. tombs that he could remove the topstone from, revealing hidden spaces inside, and secret chambers hidden beneath the church, and graves that were damaged and accessible, where he maintained just enough to create the illusion that they were sealed. My father, Steve stated, always said that if you ever needed anything hidden and never found, to go to him, and he could hide it in one of the graves and no one would ever find it. Steve said that he actually caught his father on one occasion with 2 underage girls. He went to the shed, and when he walked in, his father was in the room with a mattress, and he could hear the girls giggling. There was pornography playing on the television and porn magazines around the place. My dad knew he was caught out, Steve said. He just looked at me in the face and said, quote, "Well, they've got to learn somehow," unquote. Later in his statement, Steve said the following, which I'm going to add here in full. He said, quote, "In late 1988, I went down there one time and he was having a fire down there. There was what he called a hornet's nest or wasp's nest. It was sort of dusk, turning dark, and I had nothing to do that evening. So as I turned up there was a few people standing around. If I remember right, I believe Robert Smith was standing there. There was this very large hole at the side of the grave, and it was full of sticks and wood, and it was glowing like a furnace, like really glowing. You could melt glass in it. It was raging underground, this fire, and basically he was pouring either diesel or paraffin into it. It made like a whooshing noise as you poured it into the hole, and then it flared up after." Steve went on, providing further information. Quote, "For it to be raging like that, it must have been burning for days. It could have been underground, under the gravestone. It was that intense, the flames and heat. The glow was white in the hole. It was glowing that much. It was like looking into a furnace when you see iron being melted and stuff like that. It was raging underground. The hole, I'd say, was about 3 feet long, going down about another 3 feet." It's all really interesting, yet circumstantial. Whilst the rumours and stories of Lambert have come in thick and fast over the years, police have either not followed up or completely missed the opportunity. Do you remember early in the episode where I stated that some eyewitnesses to the events at the shed, some of the children, now adults, who attended, also mentioned other adults being there with Lambert? Well, let's talk about that. A number of witnesses at the shed stated that Lambert had a close association with a local policeman. Steve Lambert was asked if he was aware that his father had any friends in the police when he was interviewed in 2019 by an investigative reporter working for the Boxells. Steve Lambert confirmed that his dad did have a close friendship with a policeman in the 70s and 80s, but Steve only knew him by his nickname. That was Jock Kirk. Kirk used to ask my dad for favours, Steve says, and whenever Kirk came to the house, my dad would always ensure that everyone left the room and that no one was listening to hear their conversations. Kirk came to the shed too, Steve said, on numerous occasions. Steve did say that he was aware of one instance where Kirk came to the house and hatched a plan with Bill to cover for him. It seems that Kirk and another police officer had burgled a shop in the area, and Kirk arranged for Bill Lambert to be his alibi, providing evidence of a fake traffic ticket that Kirk wrote up against Lambert so he could say that he was in a totally different area at the time conducting a traffic stop on Lambert, which Bill would then corroborate in court. Completely untraceable. I remember it like it was yesterday, Steve said. Kirk was a proper bent copper. It sounds like a plot from a movie, but I did some research and it honestly wasn't difficult to be able to find support and evidence of what Steve was saying. I found a BBC article from May of 2012 that stated, quote, "A 78-year-old man from Surrey has been jailed for 14 years for sexually abusing 2 young girls. Peter Kirk of Mill Road, South Holmwood, Dorking, was sentenced at Guildford Crown Court on Friday following a trial. A jury convicted him of 15 sex offences, including 6 counts of rape and 3 historic abuse charges." Unquote. So I searched for linked articles and I found the following information reported in Surrey Live a week later in an article titled, quote, ex-policeman jailed for raping and abusing young girls, unquote. The article read, quote, Peter Kirk indecently assaulted a girl in the 1980s in Sutton when she was under 13 years old. He went on to sexually assault and rape another girl some 25 years later when she was even younger. Kirk, who was caught trying to flee the country on his first day of his trial, had worked as a police constable for the Met in Sutton, Epsom and Banstead between 1958 and 1984. He later became a taxi driver, unquote. A simple FOI request to the Metropolitan Police confirmed that Peter Kirk was the only officer with the surname Kirk in the Met Police Force at this time. It turns out he worked in vice, so specialising in gambling, narcotics and prostitution. I'm pretty confident that he's the friend of Bill Lambert, especially given what he was arrested and charged for. Does it not make sense that a convicted paedophile would be friends with another convicted paedophile? Fun fact. After Lambert was jailed for 11 years in 2011 for several child sex offences, he was interviewed by police while in prison. During this interview, Bill Lambert denied ever having met Lee Boxell. This completely contradicted statements he gave during the period of 1999 to 2005. It also contradicts the accounts he'd given to many witnesses. Bill Lambert died from COVID in 2021. If he was involved in the disappearance of Lee Boxell, he seemingly got away with it. Considering there are so many witnesses to what went on at the shed and how many people have since come forward, it's highly likely that if Lee did meet his demise at the shed at the hands of Bill Lambert, then there are still people out there who could hold vital information that could finally solve this case after more than 35 years. The most common theory among law enforcement and many others who have researched this case is that after Lee parted ways with his friend Russell in Sutton High Street on Saturday, September the 10th, he then continued to wander around town until he saw his two friends at roughly 2:20 p.m. From there, and looking for something else to do, he went to the shed, a place he had allegedly been several times before. Upon arriving at the shed, it is speculated that he saw something that he wasn't meant to see, something criminal, and something that he possibly tried to intervene in or stop. This caused his murder, and his body was thus buried nearby. This hypothesis was put to Lee's parents, and with Peter and Christine both feeling it's a likely scenario. Lee had a good heart, and Christina stated that if he saw something illegal or a situation where someone was in distress, he would absolutely step in and try to help or protect the person in need. That was his character. At this point, however, this is just the best available guess, and unless a body is discovered, it's something that we will likely never know for sure. Further information. There is certainly a lot of rumour, speculation and circumstantial evidence for Bill Lambert's involvement in Lee Boxell's disappearance. The fact that Lambert was so close to a police officer at the time is also concerning. There are also reports of another police officer being friendly with Lambert, however I won't disclose that officer's name here. It does suggest that Lambert and Kirk, who were both active paedophiles at the time, may have been part of a larger ring or network of child sex offenders operating in the area. Indeed, a number of anonymous witnesses from the area have also made comments about such a possibility. One commenter, named Robin, from Cheam, stated, quote, Redacted, the builder, built the flats and shops in the mid-1950s in Cheam Village, which was situated between Dallas Road and the Harrow Inn. He was a suspected child abuser and was very friendly with the people who owned and ran the Harrow Inn pub at the time. For clarity, I've removed the name of the person in her comments and replaced it with redacted. Another commenter named Alex, also from Cheam, stated, quote, There was a builder in Cheam whose name was redacted, and he ran a paedophile network. He used the Harrow Inn, which was a pub used and frequented by other paedophiles. Again, names have been removed to protect privacy. These comments by Robin and Alex are entirely theirs and their opinions alone, to be clear. The Harrowin pub is 0.4 miles from Cheam train station, an 8-minute walk. It's also 0.2 miles from St Dunstan's Church, or a 5-minute walk. The Harrowin is essentially midway between St Dunstan's and Cheam train station. Why is Cheam train station of any relevance? Well, in 2022, a supporter of the Lee Boxell search group made this comment, quote, "We are now looking at a block of flats where a watch was found in the garage. One of the flats used to operate a football supporters club, and it was running at the time that Lee went missing. It is near the station and near the shed." Unquote. So what's the significance of the watch? Well, Lee was given a Swatch watch by his mum and dad for his 15th birthday in February 1988. Swatch watches were popular at the time amongst teenagers. The design varied from watch to watch. We'll come to that in a second though. Lee was wearing his Swatch watch on the day that he disappeared. A discovery which was made, which was reported to the police and the Boxells, was that an identical watch was found in a garage area very close to the entrance to Cheam train station. The watch body was found specifically next to Cheam railway station by the garages in Frobisher Court, which is less than a quarter of a mile south of St Dunstan's Church. The garage in question backs onto Upper Mulgrave Road. It's also about 20 minutes walk from Lee's home. The location of the watch, St Dunstan's Church, and Lee's home were all in the direction that Lee was last seen heading. To be clear, however, it cannot be 100% confirmed that this is in fact Lee's watch, and DNA has not been able to be extracted from it. But it is a significant find for a watch that unique, a watch that we know Lee was wearing when he disappeared, and a watch that was found in that specific area. Lee's watch was a Swatch watch model Nautilus GK102 V1 variant, spring 1986 model, a blue-green compass with a clear body. The watch was battery operated with a mechanical movement. Swatch is a Swiss watchmaker brand founded in Biel, Switzerland in 1983. Today it owns Omega, Tissot and Longines, and dozens more famous timepiece brands. Swatch launched in the United Kingdom in 1997, but prior to that all Swatch products in the UK were imported via specialist sales brokers. Swatch states that sadly records for their sales do not go back farther than the year 2000. Now, one of the appealing features of Swatch watches amongst teenagers in the 1980s was their variance. Every part of the watch was customizable and parts came in hundreds of different varieties, so no two watches were the same. They were also sold as unique items that were almost guaranteed to be unlike anyone else's watch. As Swatch wasn't a brand sold widely in the UK, there were limited units in the United Kingdom, so Lee's watch really was a unique item. The watch found matches Lee's exactly, and coincidentally, it had stopped at 2:20 p.m, the last time that he was seen. The search continues. What do you think happened to Lee? If you have any information regarding what happened to Lee Boxell, no matter what that information is, even if you consider it insignificant or you think that it may have been reported before, please contact Crime Stoppers on 0800 555 111, call or text missing people on 116 000, or contact the Metropolitan Police on 101. All numbers are from within the UK.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to our show tonight. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform and subscribe to our show so that you never miss an episode. Our shows aren't sponsored by any company or corporation, so any support you can give us goes a long way in supporting the work that we do. From all of us here at Dead Souls, sleep tight.